All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. When you picture Antarctica, you probably imagine, well, an endless, totally silent expanse of white, right? No birds, no plants, just this seemingly dead, empty surface at the very bottom of the world. But today, we're going to flip that entirely. We are taking a journey beneath Earth's most remote continent. Because as it turns out, the absolute most fascinating secrets of Antarctica, they aren't on the ice. They're actually hiding deep, deep down below it. So back in 1970, a group of Soviet scientists essentially asked themselves that exact same question. They set up camp in literally the most desolate environment you could possibly imagine, and they just started drilling. And they kept at this mind-boggling task for 28 years, just grinding through solid ice until, after nearly 4,000 meters, they had to suddenly hit the brakes. They hadn't bedrock. No. They hit something completely unimaginable. Liquid water. A massive, secret lake completely hidden under miles of solid ice. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is the sheer scale of this isolation. We're not talking about some tiny little frozen puddle. This was an enormous body of liquid water that had been completely sealed off from the rest of our planet, completely hidden from the sun, and totally untouched by the outside atmosphere for a staggering 15 million years. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. 15 million years of totally independent evolution, just locked away in the pitch black. But to even reach that water, you have to conquer the ice itself first. And the physical scale we're dealing with here is just wild. Look, Antarctica looks completely flat from above, but if you took a cross-section of the ice at its absolute thickest point, it would actually reach the height of Mount Kilimanjaro. You would literally have to stack the tallest building in the world 6 times just to reach the top of it. And here's the crazy paradox. Antarctica is technically a desert. It's the driest, windiest continent on Earth, getting only a few centimeters of snow an entire year. Okay, so let's move downward and see how this actually builds up. Because it snows so little, the snow just beneath your boots right now might be a decade old. As you drill down, that compressed snow turns into the stuff called firn. It basically acts like a giant frozen sponge. But it's definitely not standing still. This whole massive ice sheet is slowly, continuously flowing right over the rocky ground toward the ocean. And as it stretches and contracts, that spongy firn can violently snap. I'm talking about tearing open massive, terrifying crevasses hidden right beneath the seemingly smooth surface. So, to avoid falling into those invisible death traps, scientists really had to map out what was underneath. Back in the 1950s, they did this by exploding actual TNT and measuring the seismic echoes. Kind of wild, right? Today, thankfully, they bounce lasers from satellites and shoot ice-penetrating radar from airplanes. And the results? Totally staggering. Beneath all that ice sits the super dynamic ancient geography completely hidden from the naked eye. We're talking a trench deeper than the Grand Canyon, a completely hidden mountain range matching the European Alps, and the largest volcanic region on Earth. It's literally an entire world, just buried alive. And you know, drilling through this ice isn't just a physical descent. You are literally traveling back in time. As that spongy firn gets squished down into solid ice, the little pores lock in these tiny bubbles of air, which means you are holding actual tiny pieces of the Earth's atmosphere from very specific moments in history. You drill past the Renaissance, keep going down past the Roman Empire, past ancient Egypt, all the way back past the extinction of the Neanderthals. It creates this completely visible, readable climate record. It's kind of like tree rings. You can literally see seasonal textures and sometimes huge sudden changes. Scientists have actually found these stark, dark lines of volcanic ash frozen perfectly in place from eruptions over 20,000 years ago. And honestly, this pristine, untouched environment is exactly why you are strictly forbidden from peeing on the ice in Antarctica.
Seriously.
Because thousands of years from now, some incredibly dedicated scientist is going to pull up an ice core, point to a strange yellow line, and wonder exactly what kind of bizarre historical anomaly they just discovered. But hey, before we plunge all the way to the absolute bottom, let's briefly look at the surface for a second. How does any life survive in such a harsh, freezing desert? Well, biologists discovered that these tiny organisms ingeniously adapt by just hiding under white rocks. The rocks allow just a tiny bit of sunlight to filter through, acting as a natural, miniature greenhouse that traps heat and actually sustains life. It's just a perfect example of nature always finding a way. All right, let's jump back down our drill hole. Down at 3,500 meters deep, the ice completely changes. Suddenly, there are no ancient air bubbles. There is no volcanic dust. The ice actually becomes so flawlessly clear that you could literally read a book through it. And why is that? Because this deep ice isn't formed from compressed snow falling from the sky. It's actually formed from liquid water welling up and freezing from below. Which brings us right to Lake Vostok. And the physics at play here are just staggering. This isn't some small underground pool we're talking about. It's roughly the size of Lake Ontario, making it the 6th largest lake in the entire world by volume. So how on earth does it stay liquid? Well, the miles of ice above it act as this giant thermal blanket, trapping all the heat radiating from Earth's core. Plus, it sits under 350 times normal sea level pressure. And that massive pressure physically forces the water to remain liquid, even at sub-zero temperatures. So you've got this massive lake under unbelievable pressure. Scientists spent a whole decade just trying to figure out if it was even safe to breach the thing. Dr. John Priscu actually described the danger brilliantly. He said, if you poke a hole into an environment under that much pressure, it's basically like dropping a Mentos into a bottle of Pepsi, right? It risks a catastrophic volcanic-style blowout of millions of gallons of ancient water shooting straight up the drill shaft. Now, while scientists were carefully calculating the risks of poking Lake Vostok, satellites up above were spotting something else that was completely bizarre. Massive sections of the solid Antarctic ice sheet were literally lifting up and dropping down by almost 10 meters. When Dr. Helen Fricker analyzed the data, she had an absolute jaw-dropping moment. The whole idea that these subglacial lakes were just dead, isolated puddles, yeah, that was completely wrong. What she actually discovered was a massive, dynamic plumbing system hidden right underneath the continent. There are hundreds of active subglacial lakes down there, some shaped like giant footprints that are constantly filling up with water and then violently draining out into one another through this vast network of underground rivers. It is literally a living, moving hydrological network, totally trapped in the pitch dark. And man, this discovery kicked off an intense international race to get inside these lakes. The Russians targeted Lake Vostok, while British and American teams targeted Lakes Ellsworth and Willans. But the methods they used were incredibly different. The Russians went with a heavy plug of freon and kerosene to keep their hole from freezing over, which heavily risked a blowout. The UK and US teams, on the other hand, opted for a much cleaner, though super energy-intensive method. They used highly pressurized, UV-filtered boiling water to melt a completely sterile path downward. So when the Russians finally broke through to Vostok, the pressurized water shot 30 meters up their shaft, completely mixing with their kerosene. When they pulled up samples and proudly announced the discovery of a totally new type of bacteria, the international science community was, well, deeply skeptical, mostly because the bacteria closely matched species known to thrive in, you guessed it, kerosene. Meanwhile, the British team attempting the clean hot water drill tragically ran out of fuel just short of their target. Talk about a heartbreak. So it all came down to the final American team. And this moment was just an absolute, sheer triumph. The American team slowly melted their way down, deeper and deeper, until the monitors showed they had broken through, completely cleanly. A massive roar just went up in the control room. They pulled up an uncontaminated sample of liquid water and sediment. And they didn't just find a few stray, lonely cells. No. They found tons of life, an entire, thriving ecosystem existing in the absolute pitch dark. They actually drilled down again in 2018 to grab deep sediment, and that confirmed the details of this really incredible old new life. The whole ecosystem is built on thriving colonies of bacteria, which are regulated by unique, totally undiscovered viruses. And hey, don't worry, they only eat bacteria and are completely harmless to humans. And while the camera rovers didn't spot any large, hidden sea monsters swimming around down there, what they did find was ancient life that's been totally separated from the modern sunlit world for millions of years. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this explainer. The technology we use to cleanly drill through miles of ice and the proof that complex ecosystems can thrive in cold, pressurized, absolute darkness, it isn't just about understanding Earth. It is a direct rehearsal for space exploration. If life can find a way to thrive under the crushing ice of Antarctica, what mysteries are waiting for us right now beneath the frozen crust of icy moons like Europa? It's a question that completely changes how we look at the stars. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey beneath the ice.